Speaking in general terms, all skills are made up of motor programs. All skills are made up of motor programs. Sometimes we call these, by the way, executive motor programs. I'll come back to that term. And all motor programs are made up of what we call subroutines. And that's really where I want to go first in this tutorial. I want to just immediately dive into examples of what these subroutines might be. I'll come back to the exact meaning of this in a moment, but I think it will be clear once we've given a bit of an example. So let's take our baseball performer, nearly said basketball, our baseball performer here. We've only got one still shot of the performance, but we could say this performer has gone through, in order to play the shot, they've gone through a preparation. Picture them sort of drawing the bat back behind them. Their shoulders would be extended, or their right shoulder would be extended. The bat would be behind their back. They would be more sideways on, etc. They'd be in their preparation phase. Then they would go through their execution phase, which is where, they swing the bat through the ball. Then they would go through their recovery, or sometimes what we call their follow-through stage. And then we would also have what's called overall efficiency, the idea of those sort of movements combined with one another and how they're timed and sequenced. Those there are a series of subroutines that relate to the overall performance of striking a baseball in a baseball activity, right? But if we look at another example, let's take the example of running. We might find I'll actually draw it over here. We might find a different set of subroutines here, okay? Because this is sort of this is a continuous activity on the continuity continuum. What we could say here is that we could separate the subroutines into head movement, in which case we'd want it to be obviously nice and still, but that's a subroutine in and of itself. We could be talking about the arm action, that sort of pumping action of the shoulders, say. We could be talking about the leg action. This athlete might be particularly interested, for example, at the kind of the flexion. Let me do a different color. The flexion angle of this knee. Now, there's actually specific reasons for that, but the more she actually flexes this knee, it's actually the lower what we call their moment of inertia would be, and actually the faster the leg would come back through. That's a sort of a technical point, but my point is that leg action has its specific technique. She then needs to think about her core, effectively not sort of rotating too much around the core. And then we've even got a subroutine of breathing. Now, you might think about that breathing one. That might particularly relate to something like swimming, for example. You think about front crawl and breaststroke. You're going to breathe at specific times, okay? So what we've got here is we've got different types of subroutines depending on the nature of the activity. Now, there's no reason why you can't talk about the head movement here, the arm action here, the leg action, of course, but I'm trying to give you different examples of different groupings of subroutines. So one of the key skills that I would encourage you to sort of get good at is how would you break a skill down into its different parts, its different subroutines. And with that in mind, this is where I would like to link you back to the main point. A motor program, sometimes called an executive motor program. So I'll just offer that term to you just in case you come across it. Same thing, motor program, executive motor program, okay, just slightly adapted term in case you come across it. We are talking here about the following concept. We are talking here about a generalized series of movements. Okay, now the next bit, and this just takes a little bit of conceptual sort of grasping here. The next point I want to make to you is it's stored. Okay, and that storage is it's stored in the LTM, in the long-term memory. So the motor program is a memory. Okay, and that's really important to stress. It's a memory of movement stored in the long-term memory. But this is where it gets interesting, folks. This storage, once it's sort of retrieved and decoded, it can be adapted. So think about our baseball player, yes, has that kind of preparation, execution, recovery, but they're going to adapt that to the type of pitch that's delivered to them, right? They're going to adapt that in that way. And basically, if I look at it like this, what causes better adaptation is greater experience. The better practiced we are, the more we are able to adapt. This is going to, the greater the experience, this could be the greater the skill. And what this is going to do is that the adaptation will become more accurate, to the specific circumstances, but it will also happen faster. In other words, our reaction time will become less and less. We will react faster and faster. So the recall of that information is really important. Now, there's a couple of other terms I want to introduce to you before we finish this. Tutorial. What we're talking about here, of course, is we've got some sort of notion of communication between the brain and the muscle, right? You know, go back to my baseball example. This person's brain is causing this person's arms and legs to move, right? We've got coordination here. So with that in mind, I want you to be thinking about the next stage. Effectively, what we're talking about here is that we actually produce. Let me choose a different color. We actually produce the MP or the EMP. We actually produce the motor program. So it's not just that we store it, but we produce it. And we do this in the following way. We do this through a series of nerve impulses, which of course they're communicating between the brain and, I'll come to in a second, the effector mechanisms. We've also got a series of muscle contractions. Okay, so a nerve impulse and muscle contractions. Those muscles, of course, pull onto bones, cause the movement to happen. But we produce the movement in that way. How? Because we've taken our stored memory, we've adapted it, we've produced it in the actual movement, whatever the scenario dictates to us. And this combined, this sort of notion here, this is what we call the effector mechanism, more of which in a future tutorial, the effector mechanisms. This is actually how we produce that movement, nerve impulses and muscular contractions. And one of the things that's really neat about it, and one of the ways in which we can adapt it, is, of course, we can change the movements by the timing of the contractions, by the sequencing of the contractions. So if we go back to our examples at the top, you could argue that every running stride is different. Every high jump this person jumps is different. Every time they perform this, we call this a straight tuck. No, it's more of a pike tuck. Would you call that? Or every time this person swings the bat to a particular delivery of the pitch, it's slightly different each time. Why? Because the timing, the strength, the sequencing of the contractions is slightly different each time. That's what we mean by motor programs. Hope that's useful. Cheers.